Hi everyone, I'm Dave Gaskin. Welcome to this brand new artist commentary video. This time we're taking a look at a Lord of the Rings sketch card that I drew for the Cryptozoic Middle-earth set, which released at the end of last year. This is actually a card that I drew 2.5 years ago. This was drawn in autumn 2020, so yeah, it was a busy summer for me that year. I had this set, which I felt very, very lucky to work on. I'll come to that in a moment. But before this one, I'd also worked on a Puppet Master set for that little 80s cult horror film with the little demonic puppets, which was great fun to work on, something very different from what I normally do. And I also worked on, I think it was Ultraman. I think it was an Ultraman set that I did around that same time. So I went from one set straight into another, and this set was the one that I did last out of the three. And yeah, it was for Cryptozoic, so a very established trading card company. And when they invited me to work on this set, I got quite excited because, as many of you I'm sure, I loved the Lord of the Rings film adaptations when they came out in the early 2000s. 20 years ago, can you believe it? It feels like yesterday. And yeah, and also because there's the history with Tolkien. Tolkien, when he was young, actually lived in a city in England called Birmingham, which is where I'm from. And when I was younger, particularly when I went to secondary school or high school, I became very aware that literally just down the road from where I was going to school is an area of Birmingham where Tolkien lived as a young boy, and a lot of that area inspired locations in the Lord of the Rings books that he then went on to write. Sehol Mill, Moseley Bog. Any Brummies watching this, I'm sure you will know where I'm talking about. So when I got the invite for this set, it was a bit of a no-brainer. I couldn't say no to this one, really. And I always thought that Star Wars was the top of my bucket list. But having at this point worked on several Star Wars sets, I wanted to go for something a bit different. And yeah, when Lord of the Rings popped up, I was like, you know what, I think I have to do this. And I think I did 40 cards, 40 pack inserts as they're called. So for those not familiar with trading cards and how they work, the bulk of the cards that us artists will draw, they go into packs. They're hidden within packs, if you like. And if you buy a box of these trading cards, you might be lucky to find one of these sketch cards, and you get the original sketch card that is hand drawn. It's the only one that exists. You might find one of those in a pack of cards that you get. And so I did 40 pack inserts, and then I think I had 3 or 4 artists' returns, which are ones that I can draw on whatever I want and sell them on. And so yeah, this is one of those pack inserts. So obviously it's the late great Christopher Lee as Saruman, and this was based on, we were very lucky actually with Cryptozoic. They are one of those companies that they supply references for you to work from. You don't have to work purely from the images they send you, but you can use it as a jumping off point. You know, if you haven't already done your homework and you haven't already, as many artists I'm sure will understand, you have to spend quite a lot of time. Either you're constantly building up a bank of reference, or when you know you've got a particular film series or franchise coming to you to work on, you can spend many hours Googling for those good shots. I do it myself. And occasionally, if I've got the film on Blu-ray, I'll spend quite some time going through freeze framing and trying to find that brilliant moment or shot, because I love capturing moments, as you know. I'll try and find that perfect moment to draw on these cards. But this image of Saruman, it was based on one of the promotional images that were photographed around the time of the films being made, I guess. And it was against a very plain white background, I assume, so that the boffins, you know, the marketing boffins could cut him out of the background and use him on posters and that sort of thing. And so I went into this one knowing that I was going to use quite a saturated colour palette, and so we're a little way into this. I haven't talked much about what I'm doing on the card yet, but I started with quite a saturated skin colour, much more saturated than the original photo, which was very kind of natural lighting. It hadn't been, you know, the saturation hadn't been bumped up or anything like that. It was kind of just a straightforward photographic element that we'd been sent. And so I did what I often do. I've talked about it in other videos. when I've picked a reference, I will increase the color saturation on my phone, and it can often bring out colors that weren't that obvious before. And so I bumped up the saturation a little bit. I may have played with the brightness or contrast. It was 2.5 years ago. I can't really remember. But it meant that the skin tone was much more orange in the card that I was planning to draw than in the photo that it was based on. And as I say, the background was white, kind of a silvery white. I could have gone with that, but I decided, because I knew that his skin tones were going to be very orange, that a blue background would complement that quite well. So you'll see in a little while, I just go with just a very simple, dark blue at the bottom, goes a bit lighter towards the top, nothing overly complicated. I want the focus to be on the face, and his face takes up most of the card, so that worked quite nicely. So for the Copic users out there, again, this has been asked of me in the past, can you tell us what colours you're using? Again, 2.5 years ago, probably not, but I'll see what I can do. At the start of the video, if you want to rewind and go back, you'll see what I often do is line up, pre-selected colours that I think I'm going to use across the top of the shot. But this is slowly zooming in, so those pens have now gone out of view and I can't remember what they were. But for skin tones, I generally go with EO1, EO2. I think on this one I went a little bit darker, so I went with the E11, E13. And quite early on I went in with some purple as well. I suspect it was probably the V's, the light V colours. So again, VOO, VO1, that sort of thing. And yeah, so here's the blue that I was talking about. Just straightforward, dark at the bottom, goes a little bit lighter. Working fairly quickly with just probably 2 colours means that the ink you can blend those 2 colours together quite easily. The highlights are already in on the eyes. That's, as you know, something I like to try and do fairly early. If I can get the eyes to come to life, then it feels like it's coming together quite nicely. Obviously, he's lit from above. In this promotional shot, he's got the evil lighting, I suppose. He's looking up at something. He's lit from above, and his hair is white, obviously, or as white as hair can be. And so the hair here, I suspect I probably used some fairly light warm grey Copics. I've put in a base for that already, and the same on his facial hair. It looks like either the very light warm grey, or perhaps the light neutral grey or tonal grey. In the Copic world, there are lots of different greys, more than 50 shades. And yeah, so the hair is starting to come together there, and you can see that I've worked mostly the whole card now. I've focused on the face initially, then I've loosely shaded the hair, then I've added the background. I wanted to add the background in fairly early because the dark contrast may help me identify which parts of what I've already drawn need to be made darker, perhaps. I tend to start light and work darker. But yeah, so the colour here is quite saturated compared to what I would normally do. I tend to go for realistic colours, but because I'd already bumped up the saturation of the reference, it meant that I could quite confidently, pick some of those darker, stronger colours to make it really stand out. If you've got dramatic lighting like this, he's lit from above, it really pays to really try and focus on bringing that lighting out. And to do that, you do need to go quite dark in places so that those highlights really shine through. So now I think it tends to come together quite quickly. If there were a graph of progress as I was drawing, it starts quite high, quite broad strokes, and then the further along it goes, the smaller those little pen strokes get, and the progress kind of gets slower and slower, and it's just getting fine into those fine details. That's where the white ink pen will come in. I use a Sakura Jelly Roll white ink pen. I think most people do, to be honest. I'm one of those that experimented with all the different white ink pens that were available, and I quite enjoyed how that one worked, and it sits on top of Copic ink quite nicely as well. These cards in particular were really nice to work on. They were really premium card, very thick, compared to a lot of cards that I've worked on. Tops in particular, they were the one company that I've worked for the most at this point, and a lot of the cards are quite thin, and if you apply too much ink, the cards can bend. But here, these cards were really nice and thick, and so they took Copics really nicely. The Copics blended really nicely. I'd probably compare it to a Bristol board surface. Nice and smooth, not too much tooth to it, so it was easy to get those nice colour graduations and blend those colours together. And yeah, I mean, this is the sort of getting towards the end now, adding those individual hairs in with the white pen, 1 or 2 little dots here and there on the face to suggest a little bit of skin texture. But it's mostly done, and yeah, this was a really fun set to do, and this was one of those rare cards that actually got found during a live break. And I'll put a link in the comments below to that, but you'll see that card being found live. So yeah, I guess that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a comment below, let me know. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, hit subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you guys soon. Cheers.